Mother of God.
Hey guys, Kingopersia back. So, another MMO video. This is my 5th one, and it is about the play styles of PvP and PVE. In order from least to greatest. So, PvP. Well, PvP and PvE in general. These are the two main play styles in an MMORPG. PvP, PvE. Let's start off with PvP. PvP, player versus player. Now, this is a play style where you fight other players that are playing the game. Not computer-controlled enemies, but player-controlled enemies. So if you're playing World of Warcraft and you're on the Horde side, you'd be fighting Alliance side people. If you're a troll, you'd fight a human or a gnome. So, PvP. This is mostly done and only done through battlefields that they all have different names within different games. But in World of Warcraft, they're called battlegrounds. I think they were called, and in Star Wars, they're called war zones. I don't really know any other ones because those are the only two main MMOs I've played. I apologize for not mentioning, many other MMOs because those are really the only two I've played. So PvP, it's done through those, and it's also done in open world PvP, which is where you find a player of the opposite faction in the open world, not in a war zone or a battleground. Now, to enter a war zone or a battleground or a battlefield where PvP is done, you have to talk to an NPC or you have to join the queue for one of them, so you can be put into it with other people around your level range, or however they allocate the levels to even out both sides. So if let's say you're level 20 and you want to fight somebody, or let's say you're level 20 and you queue up for a war zone, you don't want to be fighting somebody at level 50. They'll kill you in a couple hits. So they allocate them somehow. I think in Star Wars, they like if you're level 20, they give you a buff that raises your stats, so you might as well be a higher level player, like that. When I last played World of Warcraft, they were doing it so you could only queue up for war zones with people that were within like 10 levels of you. So let's say you're level 22, you can only fight people between level 20 and 30, something like that. Now, in Star Wars, the Old Republic, when they first started it, everybody fought everybody, and everybody below a certain level would get a buff that would raise their stats to as if they were the max level. So everybody would be the max level statistically. They changed it so 50 people. The max level in Star Wars is 50. They changed it so people that were 50 would only fight level 50 people. If you're 49 and below, you would fight everybody, but like I said, you get the buff that would raise your stats to 49. So the battlefield is evened out. Let's see. So standard mechanics of a PvP battle. You use all your abilities. The best abilities to use are ones that affect you physically, not just damaging ones. So like if you have a stun ability or an area of effect ability, you would best be off using those. Now, I've done a little bit of thinking, and I've thought that people that are spec'd for tanking is not really a PvP spec, because tanking, the way it works is you grab the attention of a computer-controlled non-player character. It doesn't work like I said in my previous video. The tank has taunts that grab the attention of the enemy. Those taunts won't work on an actual player. Now, there's different strategies for fighting your enemies. Maybe you want to focus on the healers first and not the tanks. That's when a tank becomes useless, or at least your taunts become useless. So you don't want to use taunts in a PvP battle. So yeah, stuns are very helpful because that could prevent the enemy from healing themselves or something like that. Now, there are specific specs, specific builds in your skill trees that'll help you with PvP. overall, you just want to have abilities when you spec for PvP. You want to have abilities that affect the target, not through like how much damage you do, but affecting them in terms of what they're capable of. So slowing their movement, or completely stunning them, or lowering the amount of healing they do, something like that. Then, so that's PvP. You know, usually in a PvP battle between two people, they're moving around a lot, so there's a line of there, so you cause a line of sight issue, so they have to be moving around a lot. When you fight a computer-controlled character, they just stand in one place most of the time. That's it. Also, another good ability to have in PvP is interrupting abilities. When a player wants to do an ability, which they have to cast, casting is when you charge up the ability before initially doing the ability. So let's say you press the hotkey for an ability, you wait 3 seconds, then do the ability. That 3 seconds, that's called casting. You're going to see a bar go across the screen that fills up. That's the casting bar. Now, you want to interrupt those as much as you can. So that means interrupting means you prevent that person from doing that ability. And then, so there's that. You can also, you can also duel, in most games you can also duel people in the same faction. This is called dueling. You usually have to set that up though, like you have to click on their portrait, right click their portrait, and then click the duel option. And it gives them the chance to accept the duel. And with PvP you usually get, it's different for a lot of games as always. In Star Wars, you get experience and you get valor. Valor is your PvP level, and that levels you up, and the more valor you have, the better gear you can get that helps with fighting player-controlled characters. Now, in Star Wars in particular, there's a stat called an expertise rating. Expertise increases the damage done to player-controlled characters rather than computer-controlled characters. If you're PvP, you want more expertise rating. PvP gear, it's considered PvP gear when it has more expertise rating. That's what you unlock as you get your Valor rank up. When you're in a battleground or a war zone or some type of PvP battle that you queue up for, the more people you kill, the more Valor you get, the more PvP experience in general you get, so you can level up faster. In PvP battlegrounds, I'll just call them battlegrounds to denote the battles you queue up for in different MMORPGs. In PvP battlegrounds, you will sometimes have different objectives like capture the flag, or in Star Wars there's one called Hutball, which is sort of like football, where you have to pick up a ball in the middle of the map when the match starts, and you bring it over to the opposing side and score by getting to the end zone. And you can pass the ball too, and then there's traps in the map like fire pits or acid that you can't go into, or else you'll die. And that is mostly it. There's also something called ranked PvP. This is where you get into a group of people before joining the PvP battle. This is a predetermined group of people, which means you can play with your buddies this time instead of randomly grouping with people. Because back in the old days, in vanilla World of Warcraft, before ranked PvP matches, you were grouped up with random people, I think. And same thing with Star Wars: The Old Republic, there's now ranked PvP. I don't know exactly how it works in World of Warcraft because I haven't played since 2008, but in Star Wars: The Old Republic, with ranked PvP matches, like I said, you join a group of people before you start the match. Then when you play through a certain amount of regular PvP, I'm not entirely sure how it works because I don't PvP at all actually, so it's kind of hard for me to explain. But I did a little bit of reading, and you do a certain set number of PvP matches, and then you're ranked. You get a rating based on your performance, and you're grouped together into a certain group of people that you can play with based on your rating, so they match you up. So your quality of skill is matched with other people. And then you get better over time. And there's obviously more rewards to it because it requires a lot more coordination and work and effort and time and whatnot, so you get more rewards for it. And that is about it for PvP that I can think of. So now on to PvE. PVE stands for player versus everyone. That's where you fight. That's pretty much everything PvP is. You fight computer-controlled characters. This is me. I'm all PVE, baby. PVE is, like I said, it's everything PvP isn't. It's like instances or flashpoints, as they're called in Star Wars. Then there's also the endgame content of PvE, which is raids. In general, though, PvE is just when you're not fighting players. It's leveling up, when you're doing quests. Doing quests is PvE, because you're not fighting players. It's either player versus everyone or player versus environment. I can't remember. It's player versus environment, my bad. So, player versus environment. Yeah, like I said, it's questing, it's instances or flashpoints, and then the endgame content, which are called raids or operations, whatever you want to call them, whatever the game you play calls them. That's when you group up with a certain amount of people and take on computer-controlled bosses. And those are pretty tough, depending upon what game you play and the condition that they're set to. They can be pretty tough sometimes. They require a lot of coordination and teamwork and communication and effort. So much that you need, even in PvP, you need some type of voice communication program like TeamSpeak, Ventrilo, Raidcall, Mumble, whatever, to pull it off. And those are the moments I live for in MMORPGs. Raids. I love them. I do them all the time. In Star Wars anyway. I raided a little bit in World of Warcraft. I didn't do it too well though. Got a lot better as I got into Star Wars. By the way, off note, in the early days of World of Warcraft, there were raids that took up 40 people. Today, in Star Wars, most groups will go up to 8 people. In World of Warcraft, there used to be 40-man raids. I really wish I could have been there for that. Like I said, I'm a big PvE fan. I'm on PvE all the way. I love doing raids and operations, those really late night things, and because raids, I'm going to call them raids from now on, they really require a lot of skill. PvP does too, but in terms of what tests my skill a lot, PvE does that. It really tests my skill in particular. PvP is just kind of boring to me. I've done it before. It's kind of fun. It was really fun when I first tried it, but it got boring really quickly for me. So I'm PvE all the way, and I really would have liked to have been there for the 40-man raids in World of Warcraft. That was AQ40 it was called, and pretty sure those required a lot of organization, coordination, all that stuff, teamwork, everything. So yeah, I regret not starting World of Warcraft earlier. I started it kind of late. I got to 60 like the night before Burning Crusade came out, so I never did vanilla raids. In Star Wars, as an example because that's what I'm playing now. They're called operations. Right now you can do up to 16 people, but most people do 8-man groups. And there are different difficulties. In Star Wars right now, there's normal mode, there's story mode, hard mode, and nightmare mode. From easiest to hardest, it's story mode, hard mode, nightmare mode. Now, between story mode and hard mode, the mechanics are different. I'm going to go into another video, maybe next Wednesday or next week, about what mechanics are in raids. You have to, for these, you need all class roles, healers, tanks, and DPS. And depending upon which game you play, you invite a certain amount of each class role depending upon the game and also the raid you're doing. Some raids, some battles, some bosses need maybe 2 healers or 2 tanks or a lot of DPS. Most of the time you focus on a certain amount of tanks and healers. DPS, it's usually you usually focus on tanks and healers first, and then the rest is DPS. You need really good gear to do these operations, and you so yeah, in a raid you fight through what's called trash mobs. So those are just the regular mobs that you go through between bosses. Bosses are the pinpoints, the main pinpoints of an operation. The bosses are what mostly drop the gear that you get to put on your character. Now, trash mobs, depending upon the game, can be pretty tough sometimes. In Star Wars, they are a little tough. You do need a little bit of marking and crowd control. Those are more mechanics that I'm going into another video. But overall, trash is usually easy. They're just there just because. But bosses. Usually you're given a big area to do it in, to operate in the battle, so you have a lot of room and space and all the space you need to pull it off. And when you get to the boss, you usually start far away from the boss, so you don't aggro them. You don't start the battle before you're ready. They usually give you a lot of space to get ready for people to move around and communicate and prepare for the battle. This is usually a few minutes to, sometimes you have to tell people the battle, because the battles have to be done a very specific certain way with the mechanics involved. And this usually, depending upon if you're telling people how the battle goes, could take a few minutes to prepare everybody for it. Now sometimes there's multiple bosses in a battle. In Star Wars, there's one boss battle that has 3 bosses. Now, they're really important bosses that have some type of big role, like in the story or something, or they're really challenging bosses. That's usually one boss. In Star Wars right now, there's 4 overall operations. In World of Warcraft, there's like a bunch of them. But that's just a general thing. Mostly what operations come down to, most of the work is knowing the fights, knowing the mechanics. Mechanics are the things you have to know and deal with in a battle. I'll touch upon mechanics. Mechanics are something you need to adhere to, like rules you have to adhere to in a battle. So let's say there's an ability that a boss does at a certain percentage of health. When you get them down, like let's say 60% health, they do something. They start casting something. You have to interrupt that cast, no matter what you're doing, so you can continue the battle and you don't wipe. Wipe is when everybody dies in your group. That's a mechanic. The fact that you have to interrupt that's a mechanic. That's something you have to deal with to continue the battle. That's about it. PVE is just, the raids and operations. Raids, as I'll call them, because that's what I started out on. You take on bosses, you deal with mechanics. That's, like I said, that's most of the work, is knowing the fight. Knowing is half the battle. The other half of the battle is the battle itself. And that is it. Pretty much most of PvE will be mechanics, and I'm going to go into mechanics in another video later. So that's about it. So if you want to be friends with me on Steam, my Steam name is the same as my YouTube name. And don't forget to like me on Facebook and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.